Hey everybody, welcome to another lesson of learning Japanese. Today we're going to cover a really important topic, and that is going to be the passive form conjugation of verbs. So as you should probably be able to tell, we conjugate verbs into their passive form so that we can use them in basically the passive form construction. And because we're English speakers, we're quite familiar with what the passive form is. In this particular lesson, we're not going to go into example sentences or anything like that. We're going to first cover how to basically just conjugate Japanese verbs into their passive form. And in following lessons, we will cover what exactly the grammar behind the passive form is and how the Japanese passive form differs from the English passive form. But again, for now, let's go into how to turn verbs into their passive form, starting with the dictionary form. So, of course, as with pretty much just every single other verb conjugation, we're going to split this into categories. First, we're going to cover ru-verbs, then we're going to cover u-verbs, how to change those into their passive form respectively because they have different guidelines. And we're going to start, as usual, with the easier one first, and that is going to be ru-verbs. And ru-verbs here are going to be particularly simple because the conjugation, the passive form conjugation for ru-verbs is actually going to be identical to the potential form conjugation of ru-verbs, and we've covered the potential form in a lesson before, so go check that out if you just want to know how to do potential form as well, because you definitely should, and it's going to be the same thing for ru-verbs, so it's cool to know that you can just interchange the conjugation and use them for two different functions. But of course, if you don't want to go click and look at that video right now, we'll just rehash the information. So in order to conjugate a ru-verb into its passive form, we're going to take the stem of the ru-verb, which is basically just dropping that final ru character at the end of it, the end of its dictionary form, and we're going to replace that with the characters ra-re-ru, and it's going to be the character ra, the character re, and the character ru. And again, this is going to be the exact same thing you would do to get the potential form of a ru-verb. So with that explanation said, let's just quickly turn a couple of ru-verbs into their passive form to get a feel of this. We have the simple ru-verb miru, which means to see, to watch, to look. We know that it's a ru-verb because it ends in the character ru, and when you conjugate it into its mas form, you replace the ru completely with mas instead of, say, rimas, and so that's going to be a ru-verb, of course. So we want to change this into its passive form. We drop the ru at the end, so now we just have the stem of the verb, which is mi, and we're going to add ra-re-ru at the end of that, so miru turns into mirareru, and that's going to be the passive form. Next, let's conjugate the ru-verb taberu into its passive form. We have taberu, we drop the final ru at the end of it, so we have the stem, which is going to be tabe, and then we add ra-re-ru, so taberu turns into taberareru. Next, we have the ru-verb neru, which means to sleep. We're going to drop the ru at the end, so now we have the stem, which is just going to be ne, and then we add on the three characters ra, re, and ru, so neru turns into nerareru. And now let's do one more. We have the ru-verb考える, which means to think. We're going to drop the ru at the end, so now we have the stem form of the verb, which is 考え, and then we're going to add the characters られる, so 考える turns into 考えられる. And so there you go, that's how we conjugate the ru-verbs into their passive form. It's exactly the same as the potential form, and it's just a simple means of dropping that final ru at the end of the verb and adding the characters られる. Now let's move on to u-verbs, how to conjugate u-verbs into their passive form, and this category itself is going to be split into two categories as we've seen before in previous lessons, and the reason behind that is even though we have this umbrella term that refers to these verbs as u-verbs, not all of them end in the character u exactly, and as a result we have different guidelines for the ones that do end in u that are u-verbs and the ones that do not end in the character u but are still considered u-verbs. So we're going to first cover the ones that actually do end with the character u, and in order to conjugate those into their passive form, we're going to technically do the same thing as ru-verbs. We're going to take what we call the stem form of the verb, and what we're going to do with that stem form is we're going to take it and put a number of characters after it to change it into its passive form basically. So what we do is we take the stem form of the u-verbs that end in u, we drop the final u at the end, and we add the characters wareru, and this is going to be the character wa, the character re, and the character ru, so wareru. Let's go through some examples for this. So if we have the u-verb kao, which means to buy, it ends in the character u, we drop the u, and then we add wareru. So kao turns into kawareru. Next, we have the u-verb that ends in u, sukao, which means to use. We drop the u at the end, and we replace that with wareru. So sukao turns into sukawareru. Next, we have the very common u-verb u, which ends in the character u. So we drop the character u, and then we replace it with the characters wareru. So you turns into iwareru. And lastly, we have the u-verb tatakao, which ends in the character u. We drop that character and we replace it with wareru. So tatakao turns into tatakawareru. Okay, so that covers the u-verbs that end in the character u. Next, we move on to the u-verbs that don't exactly end with the character u, but instead characters such as ku, gu, mu, ru, or bu that are technically just one character, but they have the character u embedded into them to kind of justify their title as u-verbs. So what we're going to do for these verbs is, again, we're going to take the stem form of the verb, but in this case it's going to be a little confusing because the stem form of these verbs isn't exactly just dropping a Japanese character. What we do is we technically drop the u inside the final character. So for example, if we have the u-verb kiku, which means to listen or to hear, and we're going to want to conjugate this into its passive form, what we do is we drop the u inside of the last character, which is ku. So here what we end up with as the stem is basically kik, which is not correct Japanese spelling, but in English this would be the K, the I, and the K. And so that's going to qualify as the stem form of that u verb that does not exactly end with the character u, but we drop the English u inside the last character. And so with these verbs, when we want to conjugate them to their passive form and we have them in their stem form, what we do now is we add again a number of characters afterwards, and these are going to be the characters, a and re and ru. And when I say a, this is going to technically be kind of the English a, in that we embed this a into that consonant at the end of the stem form that we have just hanging there, leaving the word as incomplete Japanese or ungrammatical Japanese, other than the characters re and the characters ru. So technically areru. So this may sound confusing, so let's do an example. We'll recycle the verb we just used, which is kiku. This is an u verb, but it doesn't end exactly in the character, the vowel character u. It ends in ku, which has the u inside of it after the k. So like I said earlier, the stem form of this is going to be kik, which is not correct Japanese, but we basically just drop the embedded u inside the last character ku, and now at the stem form of this verb we just have a hanging consonant that doesn't make this correct Japanese. And so now when we want to add the a and the re and the ru, we add that a and we embed it into the consonant at the end of the stem, which is the k. So k and a now turn into ka, which is a correct Japanese character. And so what we have for the passive form of kiku is now kikareru. And we notice that in the dictionary form we had kiku, and the ku here, we kind of just took out the u and replaced it with an a. So ku turned into ka, and then we add reru. So kiku turns into kikareru, and that is the passive form of the u verb kiku. So now let's go through a couple more examples of this. Relatively difficult subset of the passive form. For our next u verb that doesn't exactly end in the vowel character u, we have the verb yobu. And yobu means to call, basically, and here we see that the last character is the character bu, which isn't exactly the vowel character u, and it's different from the ku that we did in the previous example. So how do we do this? We take the stem form of this, which is just basically dropping the u inside of the last character bu. So now we just have yob, and that's not correct Japanese, but it's going to be correct Japanese once we add the part we need to add, which is the a and the reru. So we embed the a into the consonant at the end of the stem, which is the character b, because it's yob, and b here is going to be that hanging consonant that isn't correct, so we add and embed the a into that. So basically the letter b turns into ba now, which is correct Japanese. So now we have yoba, then we add reru, so yobareru is the passive form of the verb yobu, which means to call. So here we see that basically just the bu at the end of yobu turns into a ba, and then we add reru. So yobu is now yobareru, which is the passive form. Next up we have the common verb yomu, which means to read, and this is an u verb and it ends with mu. We're going to change that mu. We take out the u that's embedded in mu and we replace that with an a, so it turns into ma, then we add reru. So there we have it. Yomu turns into yomareru, and that's going to be the passive form of yomu, to read. For our last example for this subset, we have the u verb oyogu, which means to swim. The last character here is gu. We take out that u inside of gu, so now we just have this hanging consonant g. We add the letter a to that g, so now g is ga. Then we add the other two characters reru, so oyogareru is the passive form of oyogu. Okay, so that covers the u verbs, and now we actually do have one more subset, which are the irregular verbs. And we have two irregular verbs when it comes to conjugating into the passive form, and these verbs are kuru, to come, and suru, to do. And the passive form of kuru is going to be korareru, and the passive form for suru is going to be sareru. And there isn't exactly any guidelines you need to follow to reach these conjugations. You just kind of have to commit it to memory that the passive form of suru is sareru, and the passive form of kuru is korareru. And so yeah, you only have to remember two of them as being irregular, so it should be simple enough. And with that, that covers basically all of the categories of verbs that we need to conjugate into their passive form. And so now we can use the passive form in sentences to mean what the passive form means, which we will cover in following videos. So make sure you do get a proper idea of how we conjugate these different categories of verbs so that when we use them in actual sentences, it isn't too confusing.